Hello everyone and welcome to the Bismuth Forge Podcast. I'm Kelsey.
I'm Brian.
And I'm Chris.
So, how did we get here? My name is Kelsey and I go by Burb or Black Hole Burb on the internet. I currently live in Winchester in the UK as I'm a current University of Winchester student in my second year of a game development degree. After I graduate, I plan to find work in the industry while also working on our game dev company on the side. My favourite game is Persona 3 and my favourite genre is JRPGs.
Hi, my name is Brian. I go by Storm on the internet. I currently live in Kentucky in the United States as I finish up my second degree in software engineering. After I graduate in May, I plan to work for tech companies nearby until I feel financially stable enough to make the trip over to UK. My current favorite game is Hollow Knight, and I really enjoy multiplayer roguelikes.
My name is Chris, and on the internet I go by Spectral Flame, or Spec for short. I just moved from the Midwest US to Winchester in the UK a few months ago. I currently do web development for a Finnish software agency named Verdix, but I would like to find a local software job in the near future in the UK. My current favorite game is Beat Saber, and my favorite genre is rhythm games.
So, as a quick follow-up to the intro, I'd like to quickly say to please bear with us for the first few episodes of this podcast. There's a high likelihood we may accidentally refer to each other by our online names simply because that's how we've known each other for the longest. And on that topic, how about we talk about how we all ended up meeting?
Yeah, I mean, I think it starts with Chris, right? You were the first to be there.
Yeah, so we all met each other through the community for a game called Antimatter Dimensions. So it's a incremental game, and the idea behind that is essentially it's a game about automation. And so I first joined the game community for that, I want to say maybe 6 years ago, something like that.
I know I joined in 2017, I think it was.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah, I think it was my first year of undergrad college, so it had to have been 2017 or 2018.
Yeah.
I think I might have
And I
joined...
think you were probably a year and a half before me.
Yeah, like 2016 maybe.
Yeah, it sounds right.
Oh, wow. I definitely joined a lot later. I was mid to late 2019, around September time, because I remember it was just as school was starting back up.
Right.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think I
I mean,
also joined in the fall. But yeah, it must have been a few years beforehand.
Yeah.
Yeah, the community itself was really, it's an online Discord group. Large total following. I think currently there's, 24,000 people on the server?
Oh, wow.
Yeah, something like that, yeah.
But back when I first joined, I think it was less than 10,000. So,
Yeah.
quite a bit smaller.
I want to say back when I joined, it was only a couple thousand or something like that.
I remember that when I joined, there were still welcome messages in the general chat. Like, the default Discord, this person has just landed.
Yeah.
Welcome messages that it does.
Here's a pizza party.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a very small community until the mobile version was released, which happened like in, I want to say 2020 or something like that.
Oh gosh,
No,
it had to have
I
been 22.
I joined through mobile.
Ah,
That's how I found the game.
I see.
I used to play it on my tablet after I got home from school because it's like, what else am I doing? And I ended up joining the Discord server a couple of weeks later. Yeah. The mobile release definitely is what kick-started a lot of the joining.
100%.
No doubt about it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But-
so each of us has a different level of involvement in the actual production of that game as it continued, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Chris, obviously, was the first one to join there. I ended up joining the testing team. And then shortly after, in the next wave of testers that were added, I believe Kelsey was added. I think that's how it went, right?
Yeah. I was part of the Wave 3 testing group.
Right,
Yeah.
and then Brian was part of the Wave 2. But yeah, basically, so all three of us were part of the development and playtesting team for the game. And that was a large factor to what led us to be a lot closer to each other than what would have otherwise been just like, three random people in the community of a game.
Yeah. I mean, do you have anything else to share about specifically the development side? Since obviously we have knowledge of the testing side, but you had a bit more involvement on the actual development.
Yeah, so like I've actually been on my website. I've been writing up kind of a retrospective about like the whole development process of the last content update of the game. Been updating it weekly, and basically kind of going through like roughly month by month or so to kind of go through the story of how it was all developed. And we could talk about that in the future, but it's been quite interesting to just look back on all of it and like kind of see that like being involved in the whole development process is more than just having the technical skills, as I found.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Definitely the having soft skills and being able to work with people is a big factor in terms of actually keeping progress moving, especially in what essentially amounted to a passion project.
Yeah, I guess I have a kind of a follow-up question for you on that. Was this like technically your first group project in the sense? Since you were still working on your doctorate at that point, right? You hadn't actually jumped into a career.
Right. I mean, I did have some like so yeah, about that comments. I actually have a bachelor's in computer science and physics, and then I at the time was working on a doctorate in physics. But back when I was working on my degree for computer science, I did have like a few group projects because, well, of course you do in a classroom setting and stuff like that.
Right.
But like, I would say that it was the first longer term project I've had with a group of other people. So yeah, I would say so.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I'm kind of curious, because I've never really properly asked before. How did you all find the game?
Oh gosh. Congregate.
Yeah, Congregate for me too. That was during a period of time that I would argue most incremental game players go through, where like they're just trawling through the internet trying to find other incrementals to play, and then at some point they look up and they see they have 8 browser tabs open for incrementals.
8? Those are rookie numbers.
Yeah, because the nice thing about incremental games is that they effectively play themselves, like to some degree. And like,
absolutely,
yeah, and so like what ends up happening is like over some period of time, like you realize that maybe having like 8, 12 different games playing themselves and hopping and skipping between them every 2 minutes or so gets kind of like busy work. So you gradually start, paring down and closing the ones which you're less interested in. And I would say that when it came to my experience, it was like I was gradually doing that, and like AD, which I guess we'll probably be using that to refer to Antimatter Dimensions a lot as well, since we're just used to that. But AD was one of the games that just happened to kind of survive, so to speak, me looking through and saying, like, this is boring me, close. This is not fun, close. Why am I still playing this, close, etc.
So if I can give my insight on that, I think the biggest reason that AD made such an impact was because it had such a long-term like idea for its content, right? Almost every game on Congregate, you can basically finish the entirety of its content in less than 2 days. Like,
definitely.
And this goes for incremental games specifically, right? They're not meant to be long-term if they're put on Congregate. I think that was the biggest thing. And then you look at AD and the way that it was sort of put on there and sort of changing the scene to be hey, this is going to be a month-long experience. In my head, that's why I kept at it for so long. And the reason... What's funny about it is I actually didn't even join the Discord until I had finished the game.
Me too, actually.
Like, I had hit the last point of content, and then I joined the Discord because there were still chat boxes on Congregate back then.
Oh, right.
And so I was talking with someone in the chat box who was like, hey, you should join the Discord. And I was like, oh yeah, I should probably do that.
Yeah, for me personally, because I did join through mobile AD, I was just scrolling through the App Store one day, just bored looking for new games I could install, and I saw this one, and I figured, you know what, sure, why not, let's give it a go. It seems like it's more interesting than other types of games that I play of this genre, and then I played it, and that's kind of what got me into playing incrementals as a whole, because up until that point the only type of incremental I'd played before were your general run-of-the-mill kind of cruddy mobile idle games which aren't actually good, they're just there to steal your money. So it was a surprise to play a game and it's like, oh this is actually good and it's designed to be playable and I don't need to pay money to beat it? Wow. Hello, this is new.
I think the biggest reason for that, right, is it stems from being a game designed for web, right? It's not a game designed intentionally for mobile. Because, like you had said, you're talking about games that are, like, designed for mobile, and they're only to be played on mobile, and therefore they have that sort of inclination to be money sinks because they can. It doesn't fly for people that play games on PC. They don't really enjoy microtransactions at all. But when you sit down and you get like a 40-year-old that doesn't really play video games and they start playing a game on their phone, they don't really think twice. They just buy stuff and they're like, okay, cool.
Yeah.
It's different business models. And so porting a game from web to mobile makes a different experience.
Oh, absolutely.
It's funny that you bring that up because like there was in the final content update for AD, like we did end up putting in like essentially microtransactions on the web and Steam versions as well. But like I just think back to when we were thinking about like, oh, well, we know that these microtransactions already exist in the mobile version. We can just copy those over. But like we basically doubled the play length of the game and thought like, okay, well, we need to add like more need, I guess, in quotation marks, but like we're going to add more microtransactions in that second half of the content. And like we weren't entirely sure how to like what kinds of microtransactions we should put in. And like I still remember when we were first throwing out various ideas that Heavy Pell, like, you know, the main dev for AD, was like thinking, oh, what if we just like give a multiplier to this or like this? And then like me and some of the other devs were like theory crafting and thinking about what effects that would have, and then we would say like, no, that's going to utterly unbalance the game. Like there were so many times where like something would be suggested and we're like, no, we've already balanced the game. This will kind of wreck things. And I think it's interesting because of the fact that, like, since we didn't really intend on adding microtransactions until, I guess, somebody brought it up nearer to release, that, like, everything was balanced without that in mind. And granted, I've not actually played any mobile incrementals before, but, like, the general gist I've been hearing from various other sources and stuff very much seems to suggest that those are balanced with microtransactions in mind.
Oh, definitely.
To be fair, it's not that they're balanced with microtransactions in mind. It's that they're not balanced, and microtransactions are the only way to make it so that the game feels balanced.
Yeah, I guess that's another way to
sit there and play
it.
for a year before you even get to any real content.
Yeah.
Which, first of all, if you're sinking that much time into a game, you may as well spend money on it.
I mean,
at that point.
However, counterpoint, like, incrementals are kind of, like, one of their premises is that they play themselves. So, like, sinking a year into an incremental is a bit different than, like, sinking a year into an MMO or something like that. Because, like, you can just open it up and then, like, periodically check in on it once a week for a year. And that, like, kind of still counts in many cases.
Sure.
Yeah.
But, I mean, yeah, I think there is still something to be said about, like, loyalty, in a sense, to a game. Because, like, if all you're doing is checking in on a game once a week, like, do you really care about that game quite as much anymore? And, I don't know, that'll depend on who you ask, I would say.
Yeah, I agree.
Absolutely. I mean, going back to just how we ended up finding ourselves on the server, inside the game there's a little fun feature. It's a news ticker. It just scrolls across the top with messages that have been submitted by players and some which were generated from the pre-existing provided texts from players. And there was one which was something to do with click this to join the Discord server. And so I did, and then there I was on the server. Although I didn't exactly become too active on that until... Because I joined in October 2019. I didn't start to properly become active on that until April the following year, for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
And then I got more active over lockdown, as that was my main community I had at the time.
Right. Yeah. Lockdown was an interesting period for everyone.
Oh, definitely.
But hey, it worked out in our favor.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
I remember when lockdown was, like, first really kind of going. That coincided with when we brought on the second wave of testers, which Brian was a part of, and, like,
oh gosh,
there was also, like, it was interesting because of the fact that, like, right before each wave of testers we had, which, like, we brought on 3 total ones and Kelsey was on the 3rd one, but, like, there was a lot of frantic, like, talk in the development channels about, like, okay, can we, like, get somebody to sanity check the entire game for us real quick and make sure it doesn't crash? And, like, what can we fix? We need to fix this, and this before we get all of the people on. And, like, you could, like, I remember somebody pulled up the graph for, like, number of commits per week. And, like, you look at the ones surrounding the tester waves and also, like, looking at the group of like weeks leading up to when lockdown was really, really going, and it's like, everybody was definitely developing more during these segments.
Yeah. No, you brought up the second wave, and all that reminded me of is the fact that I was taking topology at the time, which there were 3 of us in that course. There were 3 total students in that course.
Oh, wow.
Oh,
and
boy.
It ended up having to transition to online, and so this is like a proof-based course, and so we had to take pictures of our work and send it off to our professor. And my handwriting is awful.
God.
And you know what the worst part about it was?
What's that?
During finals, I 100% caught COVID.
I do remember that.
God.
Yeah. Where, like, you were also talking about that in the testing channels, saying, like,
Exactly,
I'm feeling really sick. And, like all of us look back on that and we're like, oh God, Brian totally had COVID during that period, didn't he?
100% I did. Oh, man. Just the first thing that came to mind when you started saying, oh yeah, lockdown, and then wave 2 coincided with it. And I was like, oh God, you're so right.
Well, thankfully you recovered from it.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it was rough the couple of weeks that I was sick, and I mean, it lasted 3 weeks. So, hey, I'm glad it's over with.
Yeah, that's
Same. I think
understandable.
you are.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, I think it's... Sorry, I will say, I think it's kind of interesting what you mentioned about how there was almost a rush to get the game up to a sort of level of polish before the next wave was brought on. I think that's kind of interesting, because I obviously had no idea about that. What with me being part of the third wave, I was at the end of the development.
I mean, I will say, like, that 100% happened before your wave too. It was a lot of last minute features and polish for the automator that time. I do remember that.
I see.
But it's like, I mean, there were obviously, like you probably remember, there were a lot of very minor suggestions about improving the UI, and like, I mean, we all just basically kind of did those as they came in too, but like, you did play largely a finished game at that point, thankfully.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, there were a couple of bits of content added during Wave 3.
Yeah, I think, I mean, there was definitely the very last bit of content was something that was developed, like, after everybody had largely finished, and I think...
It wasn't after, was it? I thought it was during.
It was when most people in the third wave had finished, actually. And
there were... Yeah, it was the stragglers at the end. I say stragglers, but it was just people that were taking their time because, you know, that is part of testing. Some people are going to get done with content quicker because they are either knowledgeable about the stuff or they have a specific play style that makes them finish quicker.
That was
and then
actually
there's people that are going to be more thorough in their testing, right?
Yeah, I mean, that was actually a very big factor in the second wave, because like, so my devlog that I mentioned earlier about this game, I somewhat recently got through the span of development of working with the second wave of testers and stuff like that.
Really?
And,
I didn't realize we were already at wave 2 for your devlog.
Yeah. I mean, it has 23 entries, I think, at this point, maybe 24. So it's been going for almost half a year, actually. But yeah, it was interesting to see just like, I mean, I don't know if you remember, but like, two of the people in Eurowave were basically racing to finish what was existing in the content at that point.
Yeah, it was I think it was Sere.
Yeah, and Spinoza.
Oh yeah, it was Span.
Yeah. So like, it was funny when they like were racing and basically finished the amount of content that we had polished up at that point, like within an hour of each other. Even considering the fact that like the total amount of playtime from the beginning of new content to that was like 2 or 3 weeks. So like, that's proportionally, it was very close to each other. But then like, you also had like the rest of all of you in Wave 2 like finished up gradually over the span of the next few weeks or so. And it was just kind of
other
interesting.
than Arca.
Yeah, Arca was a fair bit after all of you, from what I remember.
Yeah, but I think they were busy with IRL stuff at the time.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, it's an important point because of the fact that like, we wanted to make sure that we balance the game to be fun for people who, you know, have a lot of dedication and or free time and want to spend a lot of focus on the game, and other people who like have other things that they prioritize higher in their lives, and like, this is just something that's going on in the background for them.
Yeah.
And I would say we did a decent job at that, all things considered, but trying to strike the balance between active and idle play is always tricky with incrementals.
Yeah. Because otherwise you run the risk of either having it be too geared towards idle players and the people who play active just sitting there doing nothing, or you gear more towards the active players, and then the people who prefer a more idle play style, they have to be constantly checking the game, which may make them not enjoy it as much as well.
Yeah, it's the concept of like requiring daily checkup to make progress, right? We sort of touched on mobile games earlier about how you can only check on them like once or twice a week and you'll still be fine over the course of a year. It
honestly, yeah,
kind of is the same with what you're describing here about like having to be constantly checking in to make actual progress. Yeah. While that might be true, the better part about web incrementals is the fact that you can just leave the tab running. compared to a
Yeah.
mobile incremental where you actually have to open the application and keep your phone open and drain your battery and do everything in between.
And eat up your entire phone, because if you tab
Yeah.
out of the app, you're no longer playing the game, and so you can't do anything else on your phone.
Right.
I mean, that's actually an interesting point that you guys bring up, because of the fact that, like, I mean, as being one of the developers for the game, I was talking a lot with Kaifik, who's the developer for the mobile version of the game, and like there was actually quite a bit of thought that went into making the game more offline progress friendly, or like suspended, like the game suspended progress and stuff like that, and like.
Yeah.
It was because of the fact that, like, somebody somewhere realized, like, okay, we probably shouldn't make people drain their batteries for playing this game, and then that
Right.
mention just stuck. So,
Yeah, it's a sentiment that's not exactly shared amongst mobile developers because I believe it's a monetization strategy, right? Where the majority of games want you to keep them open as long as possible to garner your monetary interest.
Yeah,
Right.
keep the game open so they can run banner ads or whatever, and have limited amounts of offline time, sometimes even as few as a couple of hours or 6 hours, and so you have to be constantly opening the game back up just so you don't run out of that offline time.
Yeah.
I will say that,
And-
like, I don't
Go
think
ahead.
that's necessarily a mobile exclusive thing. Like, many web incrementals I've played also have some kind of an offline limit, which I
The-
guess to me feels a bit less like in the terms of the monetization, because as we mentioned before, like
Yeah.
web ones generally don't have that quite as aggressively, if nothing else. Some web ones just don't have it, period. But
Right.
like it, in my experience, whenever web incrementals limit your offline progress and stuff like that, it seems more along the lines of like sometimes they haven't necessarily future-proofed their games, which is like, it's not necessarily to say that they're not doing a good job as developers, but it's just like sometimes it's like you have to balance the need for like having a game playable for somebody who is just going through all of the existing content in one go, versus like somebody who's gotten through 2/3 of the game and then sat at that end game loop for 3 months while the next update was being developed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I also quickly say there definitely is some level of, in regards to even just pure computing power and having to figure out all the maths, that I know another idle game, unnamed Space Idol, has a day as its base limit. You can upgrade it to 4 days, but gives you the warning of the maths becomes very inaccurate past that point.
Right, yeah. I do think it's
Yeah.
interesting to see just like how different incrementals handle offline progress. Like I think I've found that like some games which like otherwise don't have a whole lot of engaging content have kept my attention for longer than I would expect, just because they like absolutely nailed the offline progress to being like more or less equivalent to the game being open, which I don't think that's necessarily 100% agreed on in the community, but that's something I really like personally.
Well, can I
Yeah.
sort of analyze that and tell you that you've got it a little bit backwards? You say that these games have kept your interest for longer. I think the real thing is that the other games that don't get the offline progress right are actually losing your interest quicker.
I think that's a fair point to look at it, yeah.
And I mean,
I'd say so.
I think that's simply because offline progress for a game that requires progress to be happening pretty consistently is very, very important.
Right,
Yeah.
yeah.
And so if it doesn't do well, it's not going to hold your interest. And I think that is why there's so many really not so great incrementals that come out that either don't have offline progress at all or have like very bad or poorly optimized offline progress, and they just have bursts of activity for the first 3 days of existing, and then never again.
Yeah.
Games that exist and then get left by the wayside because developers work on them and then drop them.
Either due to not being prepared for them to pick up as much as they did, or just out of, this isn't something I'm particularly passionate about.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
Speaking of passions, though.
Yeah, I think that's a good point to segue towards what we are interested in doing in the future. Because at least I personally am thinking I might try and generally pivot away from incremental games a bit, just because of like basically what we just talked about, like the fact that the fact that progression is kind of founded on waiting for long periods of time. It closes off a lot of potential design space for various concepts and ideas you can do in games.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
to sort of frame this, obviously, as was mentioned at the very beginning here, our podcast is called The Bismuth Forge, and that is because we are, at least the three of us, are planning to start a game dev company eventually.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Which we have.
Go ahead.
We've chosen to name the Bismuth Blade podcast. Wait, hold on. The Bismuth Blade Games. Bismuth Blade Games. There you go. Third time's the charm.
But yeah, so each of us have a couple of ideas for games that we're planning on working on, either as like individual or smaller group projects over the next couple of years. But we do essentially want to make our own company together because we have, at least in our opinion, pretty good synergy between all of us. We feel as though we can work well together. We have relatively common interest in terms of things that we'd like to create.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And I think, from what we all feel, we have a relatively wide range of skills that encompass what we need.
Yeah, and any skills that we might be missing are skills that we're all like broadly kind of working on picking up in the near future as well.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I'm planning on picking up as soon as I can is creative writing, because my biggest draw for game design is actually the story development.
I mean, absolutely same.
Yeah, I really, really enjoy story games. I play a lot of single-player games that are completely story-driven, and the draw for me on those is 9 times out of 10 the story. If the story isn't up to my imaginary standards, then I won't be interested in continuing to play.
I'm very much in a similar boat. I very much love story games. I'm a sucker for a good story. Definitely can make up for a game where the gameplay might not be absolutely spectacular. And I have done a lot of like short stories in the past as well. I very much enjoy creative writing, even if I haven't done it in a little while. But it's still something that I do very much enjoy and have been meaning to get back into doing.
Well, yeah, but I mean, there's a big reason that you haven't gotten back into creative writing in the last, let's see, is it 114 days now?
Yep, I believe today will be the 115th, is because I personally have been working on improving my art skills. I've managed to do one proper drawing a day for consistently. I haven't missed a day so far, which I'm quite proud about, for 115 days. Started back in November, I want to say. Mid-November, possibly late November.
I mean, as we can attest to, since we've seen every drawing, it's been very, very good improvement. And I mean, as much as I would love to say I should do the same, I don't have the resources to do so. And I mean, you're just doing a great job.
Thanks.
So I mean,
really appreciate that.
You've come a very long way. Yeah.
Yeah, I won't say that like you started out in a bad spot, but you're definitely at a very, very good spot now.
Yeah. and I'm only gonna keep on honing my arts.
Yeah. If it's already in a good place as it is now, it's only going to get better, right?
Yeah, that's the goal.
And then, yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of things that we all need to work on to get to a point where we're comfortable with actually sitting down and working on a game for X amount of years before we release something.
Yeah.
But there are a couple of ideas that have been floating around that are pretty close to conception, right? I know that the two of you are working on a very specific game.
Yeah, me and Chris do have a pretty solid idea in mind. We won't talk about it too much because we want to actually get some form of a minimum viable product done first before we properly start talking about it. Just so it goes beyond the general game design document to an actual proof of concept.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
we haven't worked on that game in quite a fair bit, though, unfortunately. Too many other things have gotten in our way for our lives and stuff, but
well, I mean,
guess that always happens.
You did move countries.
Well, yeah.
And having been kind of helping you through that stuff, it's definitely quite a bit of a headache. You've not really had the time to devote towards doing that stuff, so it's understandable. And I've also been pretty busy with my uni work as well.
Right, but I think at this point I've settled down enough that I can probably start devoting some time. There was another game idea that came up that I mentioned to you guys a few days ago, which I would also not want to go too into detail until I could actually present some kind of a product. But
yeah,
it's like I think I've settled into the point where I could actually devote a couple weeks to a month at actually just bashing that out. Because thankfully that is, in principle, not using any skills which I don't already have. I just need to actually work through it all and hopefully publish it on Steam. I guess that's maybe the one bit of knowledge I don't know how to do yet. But if there's
that would be an important skill.
Yeah, I mean, if there's anything to do in this industry or software work in general, is just always be learning.
Yeah. I think you had at least one other game that you're working on, I would say, quote unquote, solo, but you're the developer, right?
Yeah,
Jazz is the designer. Jazz being another one of our online friends.
Yeah. I mean, so there's that. It was an incremental game that the two of us kind of came up with the resource system concept for almost a year ago, and I've just not had the chance to actually put time into working on it. But that's another one I do want to do at some point once I have the time.
Yeah.
There's quite a lot of these smaller ideas that can be done quickly. And I mean, while the game that you guys have to work on is a bit of a larger game, once you have the time to sit down and actually work on it, potentially over the summer, who knows?
I mean, that was the idea.
Right.
It was last year as well.
Yeah.
But once you actually have the time to work on it, I have a feeling that a very nice product will shape together very quickly.
Yeah, getting started is often the hardest part, at least personally I found. I do remember in one of the earliest pages of my devlog, I'd said something about well, sometimes it's sometimes the hardest part is just opening up an IDE, pressing enter a few times, and starting the definition for another function or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it all starts with that first step. You've just got to get going, and of course you've got to build yourself up to that. But when you actually start, you'll properly hit your stride, and that's when things become easier.
Definitely, especially because once you start hitting your stride, you'll start to get to the point where you have pieces of a game coming together, and then that creates a good positive feedback loop, because then you can press run or build or whatever equivalent and then see oh, I did that. let me keep doing that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just seeing something that you've made actually work. It is quite a bit of a buzz. It's like, oh my god, it's doing the thing I told it to do, and there's no errors that I can see.
I think that is a big bit of, at least my personal aspirations of wanting to do game developing, is that, like, it's, on one hand, like, web development is like, it's nice to see a web page coming together with, like, functionality and stuff like that, but, like, it's another thing to see, like, here's this game I've been working on. The reason that these mechanics are doing this, or this is interacting with the other thing in this way, is because I coded it to do that. Like, it feels a lot more, I guess, visceral in some sense, that, like, I've actually done something that's more than just a web page.
Yeah.
Something I would say more corporeal, maybe?
Yeah. Tangible, I guess.
I also think it's... Yeah, that's a good word for it. I think it's neat as well because it's almost like a puzzle to figure out how you need to lay out each piece to get it to do what you want without saying, hey, this doesn't work and I don't understand what you're trying to get me to do. Also, you forgot a semicolon.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
Too many errors because of missing semicolons. It's always a semicolon.
Hey, once you start learning a language that requires a semicolon after every line, something like either Java. Or, I mean, C# has pretty similar syntax rules.
Yeah.
At least I think it does. If it doesn't, it still lets you use semicolons to have a line break.
I mean, from what I remember, syntactically it is very similar. Yeah, it's just like when you go into larger structures, like data structures and stuff like that, that's where every language starts diverging apart.
Well, yeah, I mean, it has to.
Yeah. But I mean, like...
Otherwise there wouldn't be any other languages.
I mean, like,
Yeah,
the thing
it's
is, for the
combined
most
stuff.
part, like, the simplest things, like conditionals and loops and stuff like that, are almost the same. Maybe syntactically slightly different, but, like, it's not like something that's a for loop in one language is going to, like, suddenly be something completely different in another language.
Yeah. Like, general concepts remain the same and are applicable to basically every language. The method you go about doing so, probably different, but the core concepts are still there.
That's why the first programming language is always the hardest one to learn, whatever language it is.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And, I mean, subsequent languages, like you're saying, it's because you have the base knowledge of your first language.
Yeah, because
That
the
you
first
can just
language...
go to the next one.
Yeah, because, like, the first language, you are also learning how to program.
Yeah.
That is also a pretty important knowledge check for coding.
Yeah. I definitely say I'm still at that point personally. Like, in terms of general coding knowledge, I've never really stuck to one specific language throughout my education journey. It's always been switching from one language, just going deep into it enough that you know the general way to use it, but not long enough that you can properly get taught the full concepts before I ended up moving on to another language because of switching to a higher level of education or just different projects or whatever. So definitely feel like I still have a long way to go there personally, but you know, that's why I'm on the course I'm on.
Yeah.
Also, I'd like to quickly jump back to something real quick,
Go on.
because me and Brian spoke about our own personal goals for creative skills we'd like to learn. Chris, I know you've mentioned it to me before, but I don't know if you've ever properly spoken about this outside of that. Would you be interested in talking about that at all?
Yeah, sure. At least very briefly. So, like, I
Yeah.
think my creative outlet, I mean, one thing which is a bit more on the technical side is I would like to really dive into procedural terrain generation. But, like, in terms of something that, like, I think people would more broadly view as creative. I do want to get into making music, digital music, at some point in my life.
Yeah.
And like, I haven't really thought too hard about how and when that's going to be able to fit into my life, I guess, amongst all of the other things I'm trying to pick up. But I don't know. I guess that's something that I will probably try and do once I've maybe put together like one or two relatively basic games, because I feel as though at that point I will probably feel better about putting time towards that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I tried to learn music at some point in the past, and God, the things I made were not good.
I come from this interesting perspective that, like, I mean, I was in marching band and jazz band for high school, but like that was so long ago at this point. I've forgotten a lot of things, and like also that's all just like we did some like chord analysis and stuff like that too, but like it's one thing to have the theory behind everything, and it's another thing to like actually have the practice of putting things together yourself.
Yeah, I think
I have
that
none of the latter.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest difference between people that are self-taught in terms of music versus people that have professional teaching. I think what it comes down to is theory, right? Having the theory to back up your own production makes the way of teaching yourself through a program like FL Studio a lot easier. But if you don't have the theory to go with, you probably need someone to teach you the ropes of how a program works. How a program like FL Studio in that sense. Simply because with the theory you can understand how certain things work, like an equalizer or a cruncher. And I mean, I'm spitballing these terms because I watch a couple of producers on Twitch every now and again. But I don't really know what they mean.
I have a vague amount of knowledge with this type of thing because I did do a music tech subject in secondary school briefly. I didn't really feel like I came away with it with a vast amount of knowledge, but enough that I have a general understanding of how to, at least some of the terms that get thrown around. Not necessarily how to do things, because unfortunately it was a bit lacking in terms of music theory being taught, but I at least vaguely know my way around that type of software.
I feel very similarly. The course that I took, I took it on the premise that I was going to be learning music production, and we did 1 week of that in this was in high school, and so this was during the period of time where if you took a class, it would be for the entire 2 semesters. And so over the course of basically, I guess that's 9 months? U.S. school, 9 months? I think that makes sense.
That sounds about right.
End of May?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think so. Over the course of about 9 months, we did 1 week of music production, and so I was a little disappointed in that course.
Dang, that sucks.
But I mean, you know, I did my own stuff on the side and was like, wow, this is great at the time, and I look back at it now and I hate it.
I imagine I'd very much feel the same if I revisited any of my older stuff. I do actually have some of it saved on a USB stick somewhere. We can't access any of the files, unfortunately, because the software we used in my secondary school, we used Logic X Pro, which, to anyone who has any music tech knowledge, knows that is Apple hardware. Apple software.
Oh.
I don't have a Mac computer. I have a Windows PC.
Gosh.
So unless I am able to find a way to convert those Logic files into another software's file system, they're basically lost to time.
Unless you find out some way to do a virtual Mac OS.
Yeah, that too. But I am not spending £300 on Logic X Pro.
Oh, gosh, yeah, I didn't even think about that. You'd have to rebuy the app.
Yeah, because it was, of course, provided to us for free because the school had already bought all that stuff for us.
Yeah.
Yeah, but in any case, it's definitely an interesting thing to get into music, and I know that I also have some level of interest in doing it, and I think, at least for the time being, I'm going to hold off simply because I am also learning art as well, and I think that it wouldn't be wise to burden myself with too many new creative things at once. Sounds like a kind of a bad idea to do.
Yeah, to sort of piggyback on that, I think the way that we're all going about our creative endeavors is we're sort of like diversifying our total profile for our game dev stuff. So each of us is taking on one thing in full force, right? You're taking on art with pretty much your whole devotion. You sort of, like you had mentioned, you'd sort of put your creative writing stuff to the side. So whenever I end up picking that up myself, which hopefully will be whenever I'm done with my degree here, whenever I do pick that up, I'll be focusing pretty heavily on that so that I can get to a point where I feel comfortable and can work with you, since I feel very comfortable with your creative juices and all that. So I feel like we would work really well together with that, and that makes me feel comfortable doing just that and leaving other things to both of you guys, right? So if Chris is going to pick up music, then I don't need to worry as much about the music other than what I want out of something, right? If I know the general idea of the music that I want, I can sort of convey that, and with Chris learning all of this, hopefully he can make something that fits.
Yeah, hopefully.
Similarly, we want to have that sort of bouncing between all of us, right? Where each of us devotes ourselves to one specific aspect, so that when it comes down to creating, I've lost the word for it, creating things for our games, we can jump to each other.
Yeah. Instead of one person being overburdened with everyone being like, you do it.
Yeah, absolutely.
You do the art, you do the music, and the story.
Right.
We're just gonna go sit over there now. Have fun, bye!
That is also, that happened a few times in AD development, where, like, one person would be, like, the automator person, and it's like, oh god, okay, something's broken with this, help! Sends a message to that one person. It's like, oh my god, why again? It's like, it's a careful thing to manage, because, like, especially with, like, passion projects and stuff, like, burnout is a very real thing to be aware of.
Yeah,
and
of course.
It's like, if you aren't careful with like that, you could easily burn yourself out if you just decide, like, oh, this aspect is, like, this is something that Brian is doing and the two of us aren't touching, or something like that. It's like, maybe not the best idea, no.
Definitely not. I do think for that reason alone, it would be kind of interesting to at least dip our toes into each other's specific areas that we want to personally work on, just so we can offer insights to each other's work.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, even if it's not strictly offering insight, it's what I had mentioned was, like, requesting specific assets, right? So if I want to request, like, a specific song from Chris, let's say, and I mean, this is, of course, once we're at a point where we're comfortable doing so.
Yeah.
But if I want to request a song, I need to know what I'm requesting, right? I need to give enough specifics so that the product that I get back is something that works for what I actually need it for. Same with art, or same with a story, right? Any sort of, like, any of these creative aspects, you need a little bit of knowledge on so that you know what to request or how to request it, right?
Yeah, definitely.
And so
also,
I do agree with you in dipping in.
Yeah, it eases the communication as well, as opposed to just like, I need this. I don't know how to communicate what exactly I need, but I need it. It's like, that sounds like a great way to not get exactly what you need.
Yeah.
And also, it'll just be fun to do so.
Oh,
At
100%.
least for me personally, I absolutely love learning new things, especially new creative skills. I like expanding what I'm able to do, and that's one of the reasons why I'm actually quite happy about the fact that I'm properly getting into art, because it's been something that I've attempted on and off over multiple years, and I've never really gotten too far with it until some point last year. I just had this moment of, I'm not going to progress unless I force myself to sit down and do something every single day. I'm going to make a promise to myself that I'm going to stay true to this. And so that's kind of how I've ended up getting here.
Yeah.
And you've been sticking to it for like almost a third of a year at this point.
Yeah,
Coming up on 4 months, right?
absolutely. Nearly there. Just another week or so and it basically will be.
Yeah. Well, I don't exactly know how to wrap up a podcast.
Yeah, I was
Yeah.
trying to think
I mean,
about that.
yeah, I do believe we should be wrapping things up now. We're getting towards around an hour mark, so thank you all for listening along. We hope to see you again, and if you have any feedback for us to improve, because we're not exactly too familiar with this, any feedback will be greatly appreciated. Thank you for listening, and come back again soon.